Can you see the screen at least? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So should I start or should I wait a bit more?
Eric, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Just a quick note is that I met Fabien in 2017 when we were discussing about several ideas, especially in space, agriculture, and climate. And around that time, we were looking at what would be relevant to do in the future. And fast forward a couple of years after that, Fabien joined a company called iSpace, and iSpace was one of the contestants and finalists on the Google Moon X Prize. It was an X Prize where there were quite some money, where competitors were to send a rover to the moon, and they had to rove for at least 500 meters on the moon. Okay, so there was no winner at that competition because it was very hard to be on time. But at iSpace, they made a very nice robot called Hakuto. Okay, it's a kind of a silver rabbit. And Fabien was a volunteer on that project. Okay, so it was pretty exciting to follow all that. And also at iSpace, there was an engineer working there called Louis. Okay, so Louis could not join us today because of some conflict. Okay, but since then, Louis and Fabien have worked together on several aspects of rovers and simulation, and they've competed on another project opened by NASA, I think last year. And they are pretty advanced. I think they are at least in phase 2 and collaborating with some companies. And today, Fabien is give us some time to present what he's done on simulation for rovers. Thank you. Fabien, it's for you now.
Okay. Thank you, Eric, for the nice intro. And yes, thank you for joining today. I hope I can share something interesting. Yeah, I'll be happy to hear your feedback on if you have any question on how it relates to your rover project. It can be very interesting. So yeah, I had prepared a small intro of myself as well, but I think already Eric did a lot of it. So basically, I have like 10 years experience as an engineer. I've worked a lot in robotics, but also IoT. And by the way, this is me in hazmat suit on the N95 mask before it was so commonly known in a test facility at JAXA in Japan. Also, yes, since 2015, I've been working as a kind of independent engineer consultant on with Eric. Indeed, we explored a lot of topics related to space and environment. But yeah, at some point during that exploration, I realized also that I lacked a lot of experience in the space domain. And since there was this company in Tokyo called iSpace working on that Google Lunar X Prize, I thought, why not try to join and see what I can do with them. And so this was around 2017, 2019. Then later, I stopped working with the company, also because they changed priorities in terms of the rover development. But with the former engineer of iSpace, we did kind of continue a bit our work by joining that Space Robotics Challenge from the NASA. Today, so what I'll show a little bit about is some of the constraints when working on the lunar rover. Introduce you rapidly to the platform that was used at iSpace, then how we can create test environments, simulation environments with a tool called Gazebo, and then talk a bit about the Space Robotics Challenge, which happened to also use Gazebo as a simulation environment. Don't hesitate to interrupt me at any time if something is not clear. So yeah, one thing that is kind of unique of preparing a mission to the moon is that we have a 30 days, roughly 28 days cycle for night and day, which means that for 14 days on the surface, you will have absolutely no light, which means that if you rely on solar panels for power, you won't be able to get any power for 14 days, and you need to be able to hibernate. And it also means that it becomes really cold on the surface of the moon, so you need to have hardware that is compatible with the extreme harsh environment of the moon. And in the past, the way it was solved by the Russian, for example, was to use nuclear thermoelectric generator to keep yourself warm during the lunar night and not have all the components freeze. And of course, those kind of things are not available to commercial companies because highly restricted technology. So right now, as a commercial company, it is close to impossible, maybe not impossible, very difficult to do more than 14 days of mission. So which means land at the beginning of the day, start the operation, and finish the mission after 14 days. And so this is quite short time if you want to travel a long distance. Especially the rover speeds tend to be quite low. As you probably know, like the Mars rovers are working at a few centimeters per hour, I think, if I'm correct. So it's pretty slow. And so if you have only 14 days, you are limited in what you can do. Then another main issue is communication constraints. So there's downlink, uplink delay. That is not too bad compared to what you have to deal with for Mars, but still, it adds some constraints if you want to do remote control operations. And the data rates are limited, and also you need to rely on the deep space network, which is quite limited. So you need to find a way to get agreement with NASA and ESA to get access to large antenna. Basically, the minimum size of antenna you need to get some useful data rate with the moon is 15 meters. So below 15 meters antenna, you cannot really communicate with the moon. And ideally, you want 30 meters antenna. I think there's only less than a dozen of them on the world. And since Earth is not always facing so the Earth is rotating. So if you want to have constant line of sight with the moon, you need to have antennas all around the Earth to be able to keep communication. Another one is that we don't have access to GPS or compass once we're on the moon. GPS because there is no satellite infrastructure yet. Compass because of the magnetic field on the moon, which is really weak, so not really usable for navigation. Which means you need to rely on your onboard sensors to do any navigation. And still, the situation is getting a bit better because, as you can see, now there is one satellite by NASA, LRO, that is rotating the moon. And so NASA is able to do, from time to time, some imaging at rather high resolution of specific area on the moon. And this way, for example, they were able to see take a picture of Apollo 12 pass. So you can see, I think there's the real tracks of the rover they used during Apollo mission. Other issue is with imaging. So as you say, we don't have GPS and compass. We may want to navigate on site, but also it's quite different from the Earth. We don't have atmosphere, which means there's no diffusion. And you tend to have very strong lights, strong shadows. Soil texture is difficult to catch really well. So once again, it's kind of interesting challenge, especially if you want to take an approach of like modern new space companies where you want to use as much as possible off-the-shelf components, which means that you need to make sure that the capacities of the components are compatible with the conditions you are targeting. Is everything okay so far? Or is it even too basic?
I think it's all right.
Okay.
So what do you think?
So this is, yeah.
I don't know. Is there any question? I mean, I know also part of the materials already. So,
did you consider about LiDAR scanners?
Yes. So I can tell you a bit what we use on the rover.
Okay.
So that's a platform that was used by airspace. So in fact, this one you see on the left is not the exact flight model. It's a kind of a model for exhibitions, but the shape is exactly the same. It's different in terms of materials of the wheels, which are more like the development rovers that you see on the right. Those are the real wheels that were planned for the flight model. And what you have on this rover is indeed like 4 cameras, and we had also a depth sensor, which was time of flight based. So not a LiDAR, but a time of flight sensor, which means it's also using a laser scanner, and it's measuring the there's an array, a sensor array that is measuring the return time of the laser to make a depth estimate. In fact, even those kind of sensors are challenging to use on the moon because you get a lot of infrared noise due to direct sunlight and also like thermal emission from the ground. So you need to add some pre-processing compared to what you do on Earth. And so what was quite unique on this platform at the time, at least, it was that when you see most of the NASA rovers tend to be at least 100 kilograms, this one was at the time kind of unique concept that we're targeting a real small weight of 4 kilograms. And this was made possible by extreme optimization, reducing a bit margins compared to what NASA would be doing, using new materials like composite, fiber composites, etc. So it's quite tightly integrated and a lot more simpler than what NASA has been doing. And so this one was really not expected to do more than 14 days. It was expected that after 14 days, most likely some of the components will fail and it won't be able to continue the mission. And even what was interesting that even the CPU board was based on the off-the-shelf components with the ARM control not CPU, what is the word? System on chip, ARM SoC, that was it's automotive compliant, so you still have a good compatibility with temperature range, but for everything related to radiation, it was not in particular designed for that. So what the team did is do some radiation tests in some specific facilities to confirm that what is the likelihood of having an event that would trigger a failure of the CPU. And they considered after the test, they realized that probably the failure likelihood was low enough that they could use it for the mission. And what they had also, they had 2 boards, so they had a redundant architecture, so that if one of them were to fail, they could switch over to another board. And so the platform on the right, which was used for development, is a bit heavier, as well, 12 kilograms, and using more of the shelf components. But mostly it's locomotion part, so motors, suspension, etc., which are the same as the flight model. Yes, the original mission was supposed to be in 2018, in fact. And the goal was to do 500 meters on the moon as per the Google Lunar X Prize mission. However, most of the teams got delayed at the time. iSpace at the time was partnering with Indian company. So they were partnering for doing a joint project for the Google Lunar X Prize. And the Indian company, I forgot the name of the I will find it after. Was in charge of the lander. So it was a collaboration where the rover was made by iSpace, lander by this company, and they would have been launched on a SpaceX rocket. However, due to financial aspects, technology readiness, it was maybe not completely there at the time. Mission was delayed, and iSpace changed a bit their focus to be more independent, and they started to develop their own lander at the time. And now the first mission that iSpace is targeting with the rover is for 2023. So quite a lot of delay compared to the original plan. So one of the issues that I saw when I joined iSpace was related to how are we going to ensure the mission success because so everything related to hardware, at least let's say I was willing to trust the engineers that they made enough qualification tests for thermal issues, power, etc. But related to the operations part, so how humans are going to operate the rover, and how the software is going to work to support the human. Clearly, there was a bit of testing and lack of tools for the operators at the time. And so some of the questions that I said to have is, how can we proper test execution of algorithms, optimize an operation plan, how to train people who are going to drive, because you see, if the mission is 14 days and you want to maximize it, okay, you want to have 3 shifts of 8 hours, so you need to have at least 3 operators on a given day. Plus, you need to have assistants, etc. So we are talking about potentially a team of 20 people working on this, and we have only 1 shot. So better to be able to train them well if you can. And so, yeah, this has been in fact an issue that exists since Apollo time, because that's the kind of things they had been doing. So this is inside the facility. I'm not sure which one it is, but as you can see, so everything is fake, and you have astronauts training on trying to recreate the mission, rehearse all the things they are supposed to do, like how do you gather regolith and put it in a bin for collecting samples, etc. So clearly, this is an important point of mission preparation. We had the luck to be able to access analog environment facility at JAXA in Tokyo, near Tokyo. So it was a 10 by 20 meters room, maybe, where we had a lot of not exactly regolith simulant, but something that was, I think it was pure silicate, in fact. So it gives at least something that recreate a little bit of the lighting environment, a little bit of the driving conditions. Especially you could use spotlights to get this kind of strong lights and strong shadows effect. There's also a motion tracking system in the facility that you could use to track the rover. It's just a good place to do some experimentation, but still you are quite limited because going there takes some time. You need to bring all your hardware, do some testing. It's costly. And so that's where we started to explore how to use Gazebo. And what you can see here, in fact, is the final result of what we reached using Gazebo for the simulation. So here we have our development rover with our lander on a simulated environment. And so when you talk about simulations, there's many things you can simulate. And so you need to choose what you want to simulate. There's always a lot of trade-offs. So here, what I was focusing on at the time is focusing on operations. So mostly everything that will help navigation. So potentially it includes computer vision, but also being able to render image from cameras. And we didn't focus too much on physics at a low level, like for example, some other people in the company were working with VREP to do some more like wheel traction simulations, or even some complete custom simulators where you do like a particle simulation to see how the wheel interact with the soil. But if you start to work at this kind of level, at low level, you cannot really do the simulation at high level with acceptable performances. So the trade-off is really important. And we choose Gazebo for 2 simple reasons. I say like one, it's open source, so it seemed rather easy to use. And the third one was that in fact NASA already had one project with Open Source Robotics Foundation, which is managing ROS on Gazebo. And they had a project which was quite successful in terms of outcome at the end. Nice rendering that NASA used to prepare for the Viper mission, I think, which is a mission planned for South Pole. South or North Pole? South Pole, I think. And by the way, Gazebo is evolving a lot recently. Now it's using gazebo ignition, which means that they try to make it a lot more modular, which means you will have in the future flexibility on choosing which physics engine you want to use, which rendering engine you want to use, which can be quite useful. And to create this simulation, so we had to create all the assets, in fact. So one of the first things we use is to use a DM to get the elevation model, to get the surface, the relief of the surface, geography. And for that, what is quite good is that since we have the lunar reconnaissance orbiter now, you have access to a lot of data on the moon, about the moon. And so you can get DEM at up to 5 meters per pixel resolution, which is amazing, but still in the end, when you want to make a resolution, see 5 meters per pixel, our rover is 50 centimeters long. So it's the resolution, 10 times the size of the rover. So not enough really to simulate everything we need. So if you want to simulate a 100 meter area by 100 meter area, you get only 20 by 20 pixels. So next, what we did, we checked a bit literature from NASA also, and they are working on models of crater size distribution, for example. Also on models on what is the shape of a crater. So we reused a bit those models in a simplified way to generate some extra relief at higher resolution. Same for rocks, in fact. And this way we could increase our environment resolution from 5 meters per pixel to 2 centimeters per pixel. And then, so in Gazebo, the way you create a world, that you have one file that describes the world, and you can say, okay, here is my light is in this position of the environment. So you can simulate a specific time of the day that you care about, a specific latitude that you care about. And then you say, okay, what kind of rover do I want to put? Do I want to have some lens flare effect? So you can do a lot of things, specify everything you want in the simulation. I'm not going to go into details because better to read the documentation. But that's roughly how you create an environment. So what is good is that now that we have this environment, we can do a lot of things. So one of the first things we worked with also was to do some simulation of camera outputs, because we are working on an iteration of the rover at the time. Okay, if we can start again, where do we want to place the camera system based on our experience, based on what we want? So now you can create an environment which can be as realistic as you want or as fake as you want. With those are targets used by US Air Force to check resolution of imaging system on planes or satellites. So we can use those kind of things to estimate what kind of view you will get once you use the system. And in fact, it sounds like really basic, but when the USSR launched Lunokhod in the 60s on the moon, they had a stereo camera system at the front of the rover. But after they launched, they noticed that the angle was quite too low and facing too much to the ground. And in fact, at some point during the mission, they missed a crater, I think, because of that. And they almost lost the mission because of that. They managed to recover, but they wasted many hours of their time to be able to recover. So being able to test different kind of scenarios and test things as basic as camera angles can be useful. Another thing that we did is, also one of my projects there was to do some small bricks, some small modules that would assist navigation. And one of the issues was to be able to find the north. So where is the north? Where is my absolute localization? Because of course you can always use odometry, visual odometry, wheel odometry to get some relative pose, but you're always at risk of getting a lot of drift. And at some point you can lose your absolute localization. And so getting some ways to get some absolute information about your angle, about your position, etc., is really valuable. And in particular here, in fact, the orientation of the rover is crucial because it impacts all the thermal and power performance of the rover. We are quite limited in terms of solar panel size. And so as you saw, maybe go back before, here in this rover, the solar panels are on both sides, like that, plus a little bit on the front, in fact, but only a few of them. Which means that if you are driving towards the sun or with the sun on your back, you are just losing power continuously. If you want to recover power, you need to have the side facing the sun. And from this point of view, yeah, knowing where is the sun, or knowing where is the north, which is equivalent, is very important. Another aspect is that during the mission, if you stay exposed on the same side to the sun for a long time, one side will start to overheat. And so to cool down, you need to potentially shift the direction to be able to cool down. So yeah, orientation is really important. And so what we try to do, okay, how can we detect direction? People have done that in the past for navigation for a long time. Like, yeah, looking at the sun. If you know where the sun is, you have a rough estimation of the orientation. Some problem with that is that it's not necessarily in the frame of the camera. So maybe you can also get access to the shadows around you. And if you look at some of those pictures, a bit small here, but you also even get some self shadows on your own wheels, for example. So there's many ways to start to infer orientation. And so what we did, we work on two models. One very simple, where we are just trying to get the image of the sun, assuming it's low enough. Another one using machine learning on just making a small model that would take the image from one camera and try to estimate the orientation of the rover. But since we didn't have any data in the real world or on the moon, we used a simulation to create a data set for training. So those are the kind of things you can do once you have a simulation. And then to confirm the result, of course, because we cannot be sure that it matches 100% with what we have on the moon, we can do different things, like using the data that we took in the JAXA facility to try to retest the results and see if you get some acceptable results. And we can also try to create more randomized conditions to see how robust you are, and increase robustness, even if you are not 100% sure of the performance in one specific situation. If you are capable to use many situations, you can expect good performance, even on the moon. So I think that's quite useful. And so the last thing that we didn't have time to do was to really work on simulation for training. So in fact, we did plug the operator remote control UI to the simulation, just to make a simple demo. And it works, so it was good to see that you can control a rover in the simulated environment in the same way that you would do for the real mission. But we didn't go really further for training because, yeah, as I mentioned, mission was delayed and became less of a priority. And another thing that I think would be quite nice to do is work on more advanced simulation, where you have fully integrated simulations, including thermal simulation, etc. In fact, now that's a thing that is becoming possible, and in fact being used in more automotive industry, for example, where you have model-based engineering. And the idea is to have a lot of simulations for each of the subsystems in your car, for example, and you can run them together at the same time in synchronization. So you can have specialized tools that deal only with one aspect of simulation and merge them together to get full picture of what you're doing. So we could imagine having the rover that, as it moves in the environment based on the position of the sun in the simulation, will input that into a thermal model that will output all the rover temperatures. Based on that, you can simulate then the sensors that will send the output to the user interface on the near the full simulation. Okay, so that's it for a bit what I did at iSpace. If you have more questions, I have probably more documents I can share also. But, and then otherwise we go to the Space Robot Exchange. But maybe we can take a quick break here.
Can you show a demo of the simulator?
Well, I didn't prepare a demo. I can show a video of what you have in this Space Challenge, at least. On this one, didn't prepare this
Maybe
video.
we can do that at the end, perhaps.
Okay. Have you used any kind of simulation for your Yak rover for now, or do you do all your testing on the ground?
Well, the rover I'm building has some simulator demo already, so it's using Gazebo.
Yeah, also. Any what are the? Do you face any limits with Gazebo right now? Do you think?
It was just a small demo to drive around with a driver with a browser. That's it. So not much testing.
Okay.
But yeah, I've done a lot of testing in a simulator called Coppelia Sim. But that was that was like 6 years ago, I think. Yeah.
I don't remember, we talked about Gazebo a few times, but there was maybe some, I remember something related to ROS 1 and ROS 2. Someone remembers?
So Gazebo until version I think 10 or 11 I think was only compatible with ROS 1. But now I think the new Gazebo ignition is compatible with ROS 2. So.
Yeah, I did have a question about the total resources in terms of storage, RAM, and CPU time that it takes to actually run a simulation that is reasonable for the sort of contest that you were in.
Okay. So let me then talk about. You say context or contest? Sorry.
Oh, just what you actually did with it that
yes,
ended up being interesting. I guess I'd say it that way.
Okay. So here what we did, this one, this environment, it doesn't run on my laptop, but it runs pretty well on a standard workstation with, I think at the time I was running on a GTX 1050, so not that high-end GPU. So this is quite okay, but however, there are some limitations in the former Gazebo in terms of rendering that I noticed a little bit in NASA Challenge as well, related to shadows. Shadows are not dealt with perfectly in that physics engine, so you tend to lose a lot of resolution when you are close to the ground, particularly, which creates some kind of artifacts. And if you want to deal with that, you will need to increase the DEM mesh from 2 centimeters per pixel to even less, maybe millimeter scale. But if you do that, then you end up having a lot of impact on the physics engine. Because now the physics engine is testing collision on a much more higher density mesh, and then you end up having performance issues with the physics engine. And so you need to increase the time step of the physics simulation. And if you do that, you end up using much more CPU. And if you don't increase the time step, you end up having some instabilities in the physics engine, and you may have stuff like the rover suddenly exploding, but really exploding in the simulation.
Right. So I guess the basic question almost boils down to me for whether this is still within the range for simulation for something you can do on one workstation. You don't have to rely on, say, cluster level resources in order to tackle a problem like this.
Yes. However, still what I can tell you, so in the NASA challenge that we did, in the finals, where we had 3 rovers working in the environment, we end up having a real-time factor. So that's the way it's called in Gazebo. So how much time do you need in the real world to run X minutes of simulation? The real-time factor was going to 0.2 or 0.1. So it became quite hard to work with, in fact.
Yeah.
On this even, so mostly it's a CPU bound, I think. So I didn't take with a Ryzen 24 core CPU, maybe to improve the performance. A little memory-wise, kind of okay. GPU-wise, we are reaching limits because of the more like algorithm we are running on the machine, but not for the simulation itself. Okay, so maybe I can continue on the NASA Space Robotics Challenge. So NASA Space Challenge, it's called phase 2 because in fact there was a phase 1, which was an unrelated challenge using a humanoid robot having to do some missions on Mars, in fact. So if you look at it, you see like a past competitors video on the topic. On phase 2 was about lunar exploration with rovers. In particular, phase 2's goal is about trying to find ways to do maybe what's called ASRU, or finding resources on the moon, extracting them, and maybe doing something with them in the future. And so we started with a team of 3 people. So me, Louis, so from aerospace, Nathaniel, who is working at Astroscale. And then for the finals, we got joined by 2 sponsors, Offworld, which is doing, it's a company doing started doing robots for mining and potentially space mining in the future. On Mission Control Space Services, the Canadian company that is providing also space development services, especially for mission control, as the name tells. And so I think they are working with Canada, for example, on the space station. They are doing a few good things. Okay. And so in that challenge, there was first a qualification round, which was using a Gazebo environment, which was actually quite disappointing after what we had done at iSpace, but which was good enough as a challenge to do what we had to do. And there were 3 different goals. One was to localize the resource. So it was the rover using a small sensor that would report a distance to a resource. And we had to report an absolute location of that resource in the environment, which means that you need to do self-localization plus precise relative localization of that resource with a rover. The second topic was to do have collaboration between one excavator rover and a hauler rover, where the excavator would dig the resource and put it in the bin of the hauler. And the third one was to do with localization of satellites. So it was a bit of a gimmick, but there was that object floating in the sky that you were supposed to detect, report an absolute position. And then we were supposed to go to the lander and align precisely with the lander. So all those things sounds rather basic, but in fact, when you start to have to do it, it's actually quite challenging.
You mentioned the 3. Sorry, Fabian. You mentioned 3 rovers. So there is the excavator, the hauler, and which one is the third one?
As the hauler, excavator, Scott. So the one that has a sensor attached to it.
Okay, thank you.
And this is the phase 2 challenge. Already it's a lot more exciting. So you can see the excavator on the hauler here. I will focus on the finals today. Because I think we made more progress on this. A better environment. So in the finals, there was only one goal, which was to use between 1 and 6 rovers to find those volatiles, dig them, put them in the hauler, and send them back to the bin of one of the landers. And so it was up to us to choose between 1 to 6. At the beginning of the challenge, NASA was already also planning to let you choose between small rovers and big rovers, and you would have a mass budget to deal with, but ended up simplifying the competition. Also, let me show a bit of video of those simulation environments. So this is in the qualification round. We are not yet skilled at control at the time. But basically, this was Scout rover, which, as you can see, was doing crab walk. And here it was trying to do an alignment with. Let's speed up a little bit. So yeah, just quite low resolution environment and not that many features. And in fact, because we saw that the environment was a bit poor, we didn't use any visual SAM because we thought it would be a bit too risky to rely on low-level features in such a repetitive environment. And so we relied mostly on object detection, on detecting specific targets, and making relative pose estimate of targets in the environment. And here, so the rover is trying to align to this target.
So is this like the challenge just simulator based?
Yes, the challenge only simulator based.
Okay. Yeah, because I think NASA used to run a competition called Lunabotics, I think 10 years ago. And that was building actual rovers which would bring back the resource. So yeah, I kind of did my master's thesis on such a robot.
Oh, okay. You might be more advanced than me on this topic.
Yeah, like my master's thesis was on a lunar rover too.
Okay.
So we had like a group of students who were going to participate in that challenge, and then I did a part of my master's thesis on building such a rover.
Nice. Right, so that's it for this. So this one is video in the finals. So here we are doing a bit more advanced work. So especially what is challenging here. So we have 3 rovers. They are all like acting independently at the beginning. So what we did is that all those rovers are commissioning phase, which is just, for example, for the hauler, it's aligning to the processing plant, which is this object. So as to initialize the localization relative to that plant. Then here we have the Scout here, which found the resource. And now we have the excavator, which is trying to join and align to the Scout precisely, so that it is ready to dig in the proper position. And now, as you can see, it made its first dig here. And now the hauler is joining to try to receive the content from the excavator. We just avoided a collision from the Scout. We are just passing by because it was continuing exploration. And now the 2 rovers are aligned and the excavation is starting. So if you look here, you can see the view from the hauler. So it doesn't see much detail about the digging, but it is the view that was used for the alignment between the 2 rovers. And here we are collecting volatiles. It's accelerated because in reality it's a lot slower. So we can see the real-time factor is 0.12 here. So we need 10 hours to run 1 hour of simulation. Plus, also one thing we do is that even if the rovers can potentially drive at rather high speed, like let's say 1.2 meters per second, we decrease the speeds usually because it increases the risk of having some kind of collision. It decreases also the accuracy of wheel odometry. So the more we stay at low speed, the more we can have confidence in vision, real odometry, and yeah, preventing that situation. So now the dig sequence is finished, and you have the rover, the roller is going back to the hopper here, so you can see it here. So all the object detection is based on YOLO. And what you can see here, all those items here are behavior trees, which are used to do high-level control of the rover. So each of the rover has its own behavior tree that specifies how to sequence different actions in the environment. And they can synchronize each other based on the specific flag values that we shared state values that we use to synchronize the rovers. So everything was done. So it's working on ROS, which was a constraint of the challenge, but I think not a constraint that we minded about. I think ROS is quite useful to develop this kind of independent bricks that can work together. It was useful also to work as a distributed team with people working on different topics remotely, asynchronously. So some, for example, those two modules were developed by Offworld. We have this part, which was developed by Mission Control Space Services. And we and me, mostly, we worked on the remaining items. Which is quite convenient to have this kind of independent modules that we can plug into the system to work together. Some of the other challenge in this simulation, so NASA decided to add some noise in the camera's output. So you can see here there's some kind of artifacts that are supposed to represent the kind of noise you may get from bad connectivity to Earth and Moon, I suppose, or from maybe radiation effects. Also, we had to develop a kind of denoiser system to be able to correct bad frames to use for vision. We did object detection based on YOLO. So in fact, YOLO is working very well, so it's really powerful to do most of it in a quite straightforward way. However, we noticed that still YOLO can kind of overfit a little bit. So for example, the excavator was a bit difficult because depending on the position of the arm in the simulation, it would not necessarily be detected as an excavator. Also, from some angles, some point of view, you could get some misdetection. So if we didn't include enough samples, like taking a picture from the top of the hill, for example, or this kind of things, you can end up in misdetections. This is one of our views that we use to monitor the expression during debug. So the way we choose to do the exploration to find volatiles. So the only information we got is that we know the range of our sensor, so it detects the resource from 2 meters away, and we know roughly how many resources are in the simulation and roughly where they are. And so we decided to make a kind of basic systematic expression pattern where we just make arcs. The goal of ARCS was to remain as close as possible to our processing plant, that was here, to avoid wasting time going too far away. And the reason we kept in a limited arc and not all around was to optimize both in terms of like a shadow side, so for detection of the landers, and access to the bin of the processing plant where we're supposed to deposit the items. So all this is done in RVs, which work quite well for us. Also one thing, so we had to develop custom machine learning models to do relative pose estimation. The reason being that there was no fiducial markers in the rovers. So we created some kind of rather small models using both depth and RGB as input that we specialize for specific phase of the challenge. So for example, here is a model from the point of view of the hauler where it needs to align to the escalator. So we did a few of the specific models that were supposed to help us control the alignment maneuver. And finally, I think, one of the big things that was really putting everything together was the behavior trees, which is a method, a kind of alternative to state machines that is used a lot in video games. It's starting to be used more in robotics as well. I think now ROS2 is using behavior trees as part of the navigation stack. But this was a library we developed by ourselves. So it allowed us to both visualize the state of the rover, so we know a bit what is thinking, we could say. It was quite good to have modular items. You can test subtrees independently. You can assemble them. You can reuse between different rovers. You can rather easily add failure modes. So for example, this is related to power management. So we did all the development by ignoring power for most of our development time. And very at the end, we added this part of the tree, and it didn't have any impact to the rest of our model. So it was really rather easy to integrate. Also, there's specific syntax for behavior trees where you have different kind of nodes. You can do sequence or selectors that define how you switch from one node to another. And for monitoring, we had to have a big screen is recommended when you deal with many rovers to try to visualize as much as you can. This has got so toward the end, we are running continuously a lot of runs to do some debug. During runs, recording the output, and then replaying them in accelerated to go through them and see where we had any failures. It was for the integration test. And so if I summarize the main challenge during the simulation challenge, the performance. So I think it was a good question earlier. The performance was an issue that really makes it hard to do integrated tests. The lack of fiducial markers, which is a bit annoying that they didn't put them in the simulation, because we could have focused on doing more interesting work, maybe, because NASA is always putting a lot of fiducial markers in the rover. This is on Mars exploration rovers. You can see there's one marker here, one marker here, one here. You have calibration targets here. I'm sure maybe another one in the picture, but that's it. But if you count on the rovers, there's a lot more of them. It's everywhere. This one. This is the compass. Not compass. For this is to detect the sun orientation.
It's a solar clock.
Solar clock, yes. So I think it's correct. Once you have a rover and the equipment is expensive, it's good to add all those relatively cheap items that can improve the performance a lot. So another issue was dealing with the obstacles in the maneuver area. So when we need to do those precise maneuvers, you start to look at your target, so you cannot look all around. So if you have rocks or hills around, it can influence your trajectory. Plus, maybe you want to align in a place it's impossible. So you have a lot of constraints to deal with. It's quite difficult to deal. So that's kind of dealing with reality. And so this boils down to everything related to failure identification and recovery, which is a topic in and of itself. And we did some kind of minimal aspect of that, but we had situations where, for example, this rover is waiting for another rover to align with it, but it's not coming. And we don't know why it's not coming. It's sequence is finishing. So what do you say? Like, is it because 30 minutes passed, so I should stop and go to the next one? But maybe in fact, you may cancel something, or in fact, just unlocked. The reason can be at multiple levels. It can be between the hauler to excavator alignment. It can be because of finding the way to the skirt, etc. There's so many places where it can fail. So even when you realize one situation, it's difficult to know what is really happening. Also, you need to make choices and see how you can improve your mission success again. On last one, I think you have run monitoring, how to monitor everything that's happening and how to debug it properly, how to do all those tests. Everything. I think those were the main challenges. I think that's it for my core presentation, but if you have questions, I can go through other material potentially.
How long is this competition going on?
So it's finished now.
Okay.
It just finished a few weeks ago.
Okay.
We delivered a solution on the end of July, and we are waiting for results now.
Okay. How many teams participated?
So at the beginning, I think it was around 100 something. On the finals, 2014.
Okay.
And to be honest, in the first round, we were quite. We had other work to do also at the same time. It was really. We barely made it in the finals. It was something like in terms of score failed where we expected to get a score. But so yeah, it was quite a challenge. In fact, there's so many things to work on. It's quite time-consuming.
I have a question. I'll start from the last slide. You talked
Okay.
about monitoring being very difficult.
Yes.
Explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So monitoring meaning so actually one of the aspects to have multiple rovers that are working together. And so, for example, we had our kind of own UI. It was quite useful, in fact, during development, where we could do all the remote control manually, but also monitor the autonomous behavior using the behavior trees. Also, yeah, if you want to, once you do integrated tests, and you want to see what's going on, you need to visualize a lot of things. So you need to see, in our case, the behavior trees. We need to see here what we see on that part, which is related to navigation. So our path planning. So for example, this yellow part here is the planned path. So sometimes this can go wrong. So it could be because the algorithm we use sometimes, like based on specific situation, it have some failure modes that can happen. And so if you need to look at everything, otherwise you may just end up seeing like again when we're stuck way. So you need to have this view also available to you to understand what's happening.
I'm trying to understand, is that a problem of the simulation or a problem of the simulated architecture? In other words, do you expect the same problems of run monitoring if these were real rovers?
I think the problem is of tooling. It's the problem of tooling. If we are doing a real mission on the moon, I would probably have similar issues, in fact, especially once you start to control multiple rovers. So here we have 3. Let's say you have 6, 10 extra. So now you need to Now, of course, there's different phases. Huh? The more you are early in the development, the more you are likely to have bugs, etc. So you need to look at everything. The more you are late, the more you can expect the frequency of issues to be lower, and then you can work on maybe anomaly detection that could solve that issue. So here, yeah, using anomaly detection would have been something good to have for us, like to prevent monitoring everything all the time. But doing that means adding an extra layer of development. I'm not sure if I answered the question.
So let me take a step back. A lot of these simulations were done as part of a contest which set rules.
Yes.
And I don't know, at least me personally, I'm interested in the opposite question, which is if nobody else sets the rules, but I wanted to do a simulation to help me, how detailed, how sophisticated should it be in order to help me check, for example, if the rovers are working or something like that?
I guess it really depends on your on what you're trying to do. What is your mission? So, for example, for iSpace, if I try to go back to what we had, at least we had a single rover plan to be sent to the moon. So in that case, I wouldn't simulate 2 or 3 rovers. I would just simulate 1, which simplifies a few things. Next would be, for example, what I would have really liked to test at iSpace, because we are more focusing on remote control, was is tooling for the operator sufficient enough or not? So maybe what becomes interesting is maybe filming the operators controlling the UI, so that I know what is their reaction, what is their feedback, etc. And then in that case, to maybe provide interesting event during the testing. Maybe I would want to place specific craters that are difficult to see, specific obstacles, specific situations that could happen, and see how the operator reacts with the tool he has available. So in the end, you really need to think, I would say, what you want to test, on what makes a good test for that, and how do you implement it. I think here what NASA wanted to see, at least, I guess in their original idea, I think they have some issues with the people developing the simulation contest. But I think the ideal goal was to see how people are able to deal with maybe almost swarm robotics. How people can decide if I have big payload capacity, what would be a good strategy, how many rovers do I want to send to the moon, how should they interact with each other, those kind of things. That's what I think NASA wanted to see, to see how people would make those choices and implement decisions.
I'm translating that into your simulation only needs enough fidelity to reflect the difficulty of rovers working together.
To reflect the difficulty of what you think is difficult in your mission, I think. Here, yeah, I think it was in particular rovers working together was one of the aspects. I think rover working together on localization was 2 difficulties, I would say.
It sounds like an iterative process where you identify problems and you simulate and you move to the next.
Yeah, definitely.
So by iteration, perhaps related to what Meyer has just asked, by iterating, basically step by step, the simulation becomes more and more fine-grained, but each iteration is to focus on a specific kind of scenario.
But in a way, it's similar to what you have in software. You have unit test, integrated test. They both have their validity. Here, in the simulation, it tends to be more kind of integrated test, but still you can choose the level of integration. Like I said, you can just test, for example, here, operation on autonomous behavior, and focus mostly on computer vision, task planning, etc. or you could focus on SAML behavior. And this can be done independently or together. And it's really a matter of how much integration you want to include. But at some point, I would say for this kind of mission, including some level of SAML simulation is important, I think. It doesn't need to be completely accurate. Maybe you don't need to see if you have any component failure, but you can check if your concept of operation allow you to remain within the bounds of your SAML margins.
Did everyone in the competition use Gazebo?
Yes, yes. So it's the simulation environment is the same for everybody. And what we develop here is the rover software.
You mentioned it was related to the Viper project to go to the south pole of the moon.
Yes.
The Viper mission is a single rover, or is it multiple rovers already?
Okay. So there's two aspects on it. What I said is that the first attempts that NASA did with Gazebo was related to Viper project, but at that time it was planned with only one rover or something. So this is some of the things we did. Which is quite good. So right now, multi-rover missions, I'm not aware of any in particular. In fact, the first one, this is not multi-rover, but multi-robot mission was a recent one with a helicopter on the Mars rover. I forgot the name. Ingenuity. I think that's one of the first, like a multi, yeah. I'm not sure how to call them. Multi-robots mission? But yeah, when you see the spaceship payload capacity that we have, you can imagine that future missions that may use this kind of platform can send many rovers to them. So I think it's going to become something more common in the future.
Will you have a demo of the simulation environment you've created for Hakuto?
Let me check.
While Fabian is looking at his contents, we are 1 hour and 15 minutes. Perhaps we can go toward the last 3 questions, perhaps.
Okay, I'll ask a question about using ROS. How was it? Was it suitable? Did it help? Did it just not interfere?
I think it was suitable and it helps. I think I liked it this time. My first experience with ROS was almost 10 years ago. It was just starting. In fact, it was just 0MQ with a few things on top of it, so it was not that interesting at the time. But I think since then, it has made some progress on what is the most interesting is the tools that come with it. In fact, so you have RVs that helps you visualize the output. You have all the publisher subscriber monitoring command line tools. You get access to also libraries that are existing. So for example, here for the path planning, we've reused a module called TEB. So we had to tweak it and modify a few things, but still you can reuse part of the tools in the ecosystem. still one issue I see is that you often have the image of okay, I have robot, I can just use ROS and put all those bricks together and it will work. But in fact, a lot of the things made in ROS that are working out of the box are planned for maybe a robot that is working on a perfectly flat surface in a building. So as soon as you're out of the context, it becomes a bit more difficult to find the proper libraries that works together, and you may need to customize everything. Here, for example, we started to work on a better locomotion with a full Ackermann. So we have 4 independent wheels moving, and so you can make a lot better controls than what we did. But it required working on low-level code for the controls that we didn't have time to do, unfortunately. So we choose to simplify. So if you have something that is not standard, you may not be able to get the best out of your rover. But overall, I would say it's positive. And I expect ROS2 to be better, especially ROS2 is now implementing some standards related to quality of service, security, etc. So I think it will make it more likely that ROS2 start to be used in industrial environment, which means can be more optimistic that it's going to be adopted in more environments, including space.
So your project, everything you've said is based on ROS Run, right?
Yes, ROS Run.
That's interesting because we've been looking at ROS and we're talking about it regularly, but it's mainly ROS2, right? Right, Anurag and Victor?
Yeah, ROS2, I don't know.
But I don't know, I suspect what changed in ROS and ROS2 is a lot of really low-level aspects, like so the communication protocol switch from 0MQ to, I forgot the name, but something different.
MQTT or something like that?
I think it's quite custom or maybe related to some American military project. Maybe it could be.
Yeah, I think it was some proprietary protocol.
Yeah.
Like DDS or D.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Something like that.
So I don't know. I would expect ROS2 to be overall probably getting better, but probably less libraries. But which is good because in fact there's a lot of noise also in the ROS ecosystem. There's so many stuff available, but you don't know what's compatible with which version. I hope that ROS2 will maybe make things a bit more clear.
Do we have any other hot question?
So was the competition time-based? Like in a certain time you have to do certain tasks?
Yes, so it was 2 hours of simulation time.
Okay.
That we need to do, and so it was like collecting those volatiles. It was the score based on how many we bring back to the lander.
And so it means that you have to finish the mission within 2 hours.
Yes.
And so if your software computes a lot, it will consume more simulation time, so it may not finish.
So it's quite interesting because there's something that is not even completely clear for me, but there's some kind of back pressure implemented in ROS, I guess, with Gazebo, which means that if your computing time is getting lower, if you're using a lot of resources, basically the simulation slows down. And what counts for the success, for the score, is really the simulation time. So it means that when NASA is running the simulation to score the different competitors, they may take 10 hours to do one run instead of 2 hours.
So it was a standard hardware also provided by NASA?
Yes, they were doing the scoring on their own machines.
Okay.
To be fair. There were some issues with that because they didn't specify the hardware clearly at the beginning. And, So we didn't know how much GPU memory we would have until like 1 week before the end. Those kind of things. But yeah, so I would say that from my experience, it's kind of two different aspects. That when you are really working on the moon, one of the core issues at the beginning to deal with is really environment and taking care of like thermal issue, radiation, this kind of stuff. Already a lot of hard stuff there. And then there's the aspect of concept operation, multi-rover, human rover, human AI interaction, which are more high level and quite separate. It's two sets of challenge. It's quite exciting about space robotics.
For the teleoperated robots, was there any delay added to the communication?
So when we did the simulation, yes, we added some delay to
Okay.
On the side, it becomes interesting to have a mix, like even if you don't have a full autonomous rover, to have some part of the function, like ADAS for cars, you have automatic stop, so that even if the operator sees the rock a bit too late, you can stop before. I didn't prepare the video, and I cannot find it right now.
Oh, if you find it at some point later and it's available online, after I can share. I can share with the group.
Yeah.
We have a Discord server for discussion and so on.
Okay. Yeah, maybe in fact, yeah, I think I can find it.
Yeah, I can send it later if you want. Huh?
Okay.
Do we have any other question? I think for some of you, it's starting to be pretty late. So if there is any other question, or maybe we can wrap up.
I had one question about testing specifically. It sounded like, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like evaluating the system performance was primarily a manual effort, just given the simulation compute expense and simulation time. But I was wondering if you had investigated any automated test platforms or tooling or frameworks to kind of allow you to run maybe subsystem tests or just evaluate some of the subsystem performance in an automated fashion.
At least we had some unit tests, like for computer vision, we had some regression tests with some specific image where we know what is the output that we stored and kept to see if there was any regression when updating machine learning model, etc. For more complex tests, we wanted to do it more, but in the end, we didn't manage to get the time to do it. But clearly, it could have been good to be able to run more subset of the whole challenge, run it automatically on AWS every time we push some code, and getting the output. But so that's what blocked us, in fact, is, okay, I can run my simulation automatically in the cloud every time I push some new code. That's easy to do. But how do I process the output in a way that is kind of efficient? You see, if I just show one camera of the rover, or if I get a big ROS bag out of the simulation, it's going to take forever to just go through it and see what I can do. So that's where it becomes a bit more difficult. So
are you aware about?
There are ways, yeah.
Are you aware about any tool that would do that? Something like Joshua mentioned, the tool or framework or platform?
Yes, there are some platforms doing some cool stuff these days. What is it? Applied Intuition, I think. But this is a company doing that. Applied Intuition. It's not really a tool. There are some companies in the robotics space doing robotics or autonomous car space. Is wrapping up simulation on a lot of tools to do work on those kind of things. There is also what is this one? Thought if this one contains everything, but it may have some of the tools workers. I'm sharing this chat. Otherwise, still limited. You have still at least AWS RoboMaker that integrates Gazebo environment on AWS. We couldn't use it because there was too much customization involved in the Gazebo stuff that we had to deal with. But knowing AWS, I guess they will add some features from time to time that could make it easier to test. So really interesting to follow. What else?
Thank you. That answers my question.
Yep.
Do we have any other question? No.
And by the way, one of the competitors are called Robotica. I think Czech companies are doing that's their business doing some autonomous not say for space, but for NGS development. And so they are more advanced, and clearly they had this kind of automated testing system in place from the start of the competition. And clearly, I think what they are doing is got good quality, so it definitely helps if you can do it.
You said Robotica?
Robotica, yes. K with a K. Robotica.cz. They joined other space challenge, NASA competitions before. So.
Do you have openings? What do you see in the next few months for the work you've done with Luis and so on?
So we are continuing a bit of work with Offworld on some computer vision related topics. Otherwise, I don't know if NASA is excited about things. I don't know what to expect, to be honest. I feel those challenges, which was a bit maybe a disappointment for us, are a bit more of a PR thing for NASA than really trying to involve people in the development effort. Like, unfortunately, I felt like nobody from NASA was really involved during the competition. It was mostly a company doing outsourced development and simulation development that is interacting with us. And so it was a bit sometimes disappointing. We have a lot of competitors who care about space, so saying, okay, why is a simulation like that to be much more realistic and easier to do if it was this way? And they would say, we don't know, we don't care. So,
okay.
So I'm not sure what to expect even after the end of the competition. If there's any, so they have an event in Pasadena. There's an event in September for the prize, and maybe we may go there too. At the time, we'll see. So we have some opportunities to talk with people at that time.
But do you see such kind of simulation have some potential as a more broadly used kind of tool?
I think it's really, it's not yet easy enough to use, let's say, but I think it's probably fundamental to do testing of systems like that. In space, given the cost to do it and the difficulty to test, I think it's really important. I think the market is not mature yet on that side. And there's opportunity for, I think, planetary environment simulation, so Mars, the Moon, etc., but also for microgravity environment, like in orbit, etc. See, a company like Astroscale are working on decommissioning former satellites, for example. So you have a lot of precise maneuvers to do in orbit. I think it's quite interesting to do more advanced simulations there. What companies are using these days is not that advanced. So,
Thank you.
on right now, I think it's kind of booming. A company like Applied Intuition, like for autonomous cars, because clearly it's becoming a real need. Like in Japan, we see like Woven Planet, like a new company from Toyota. They are working with Applied Intuition. They do also some regression testing based on simulated environments, but also based on former recorded runs of cars. So they do those things.
Mhm. There is quite some potential. Would there be any other question? I believe for some of you it's getting pretty late, so please react. But so Fabian mentioned about some demos he's got and so on. So I will collect the links later, and when it's available, I will share them on Discord. Okay? And I don't know if people want to get in touch with Fabian, I can serve as connection, but also perhaps I can also share your LinkedIn page or something like that on our chat. If you're okay, Fabian.
Yeah, no problem.
Oh, okay. If everyone is okay, perhaps we can wrap up. We can wrap up here.